The sea was calm that night, its dark surface stretching endlessly under a pale moon. The USS Barb moved quietly through the Pacific, her hull cutting the water with the gentleness of a drifting shadow. Inside the steel vessel, the air was thick with the scent of oil and salt, the quiet hum of machinery, and the steady rhythm of men who had learned to live in silence. Every movement mattered, every whisper carried meaning. These were men who had traded sunlight for duty, comfort for courage, and noise for the haunting calm of the deep. In that silence, only the soft pulse of the engines and the creak of metal reminded them that they were alive. The crew worked like a single heartbeat, each man trusting the other without words. Above them, the stars watched in quiet stillness, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. This was not a battle yet, but the kind of silence that comes before something unforgettable. Somewhere beyond the horizon, destiny waited. For the men aboard USS Barb, their mission would not only change the course of the war, it would carve their names into history. This was the calm before the storm, and soon the ocean itself would remember their courage. The USS Barb was born in the shipyards of Groton, Connecticut, in the turbulent year of 1942. When the world was already deep in the chaos of war. She was one of the Gato-class submarines, sleek, powerful, and built for silent endurance. When her hull first touched the cold Atlantic water, the men who stood upon her deck could not have known the legacy she would create. Her name, short and simple, carried with it a quiet defiance. The Barb was not just another submarine. She would become a symbol of daring and innovation beneath the waves. In her early missions, Barb served in the Atlantic, patrolling waters that seemed less alive with conflict compared to the Pacific. Those were days of learning and patience. The crew practiced dives, surfaced under starlit skies, and listened for the faint echoes of enemy ships that never came close. The men grew together in those early days, learning the rhythms of the ocean, the pulse of their vessel, and the steady voice of discipline that bound them. But soon, the order came that would change everything. Barb was to be reassigned to the Pacific theater, where the war raged most fiercely. The crew knew this meant danger, but also purpose. The Pacific was vast and unpredictable, filled with enemy convoys, aircraft, and treacherous waters. Yet it was also where heroes were made. When Barb crossed through the Panama Canal into that new frontier, she left behind the quiet patience of her training days and entered the heart of a war that demanded every ounce of courage her men possessed. It was in those restless waves that a new commander would take the helm, a man whose name would soon echo through naval history. Commander Eugene Bennett Fluckey, known to his men simply as Lucky, was about to redefine what it meant to fight from beneath the sea. Eugene "Lucky" Fluckey was not an ordinary commander. From the moment he stepped aboard the USS Barb, the crew sensed something different in his presence. He carried himself with calm confidence, his eyes sharp but kind, his voice steady but never harsh. Fluckey believed that courage was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, deliberate, and built on trust. He treated his men not as subordinates but as brothers in arms, each one vital to the living heart of the submarine. Under his leadership, fear turned into focus, and the endless tension of the deep became something almost sacred, a shared strength. Fluckey's strategies were daring, almost reckless by conventional standards, yet they were always guided by deep intelligence and precision. He had an unshakable belief that creativity could win battles as effectively as firepower. He encouraged his crew to think differently, to adapt, and to always be one step ahead of the enemy. "Luck," he would say with a small smile, "is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." His confidence was contagious. Even in moments of danger, when depth charges exploded nearby or sonar pings echoed through the hull, his calm voice grounded everyone around him. He studied enemy routes, tides and weather like a chess master reading the board. He was meticulous, but he also trusted instinct, a rare balance that made him both unpredictable and unstoppable. The men admired his willingness to take risks, but even more, they admired his fairness. He never asked them to face danger he wouldn't face himself. When Fluckey spoke during mission briefings, his tone was soft and deliberate. Under the dim red glow of the control room lights, his words carried a strange peace. "We will hit them where they least expect," he'd say, tracing his finger across a map. "And when we do, they'll never see it coming." It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty born of preparation and courage. Through him, the USS Barb became more than a war machine. It became a living extension of his mind and spirit. Every dive, every torpedo, every heartbeat of the engine echoed his philosophy. Fight smart, fight hard, and never lose your humanity. Under Fluckey's command, the Barb would go on to achieve the impossible, rewriting the very rules of submarine warfare and inspiring generations of sailors long after the guns fell silent. By late 1944, the USS Barb had become a name whispered with respect and fear across the Pacific. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast battlefield where silence and shadows ruled. Under Commander Fluckey's command, the Barb began her patrols deep in enemy waters, striking swiftly and vanishing just as fast. Every mission was a blend of patience and precision, every attack a gamble between glory and death. The men aboard knew the risks, yet there was no hesitation in their movements, no tremor in their voices. They trusted their captain, and he trusted them. Night after night, Barb prowled the coastline of Japan, slipping through minefields, avoiding destroyers, and hunting convoys that carried the lifeblood of the enemy's war effort. The sonar pings would echo faintly through the hull, each sound tightening the air as the crew tracked targets in the dark. There were moments when the tension felt almost unbearable, when even breathing too loudly felt like betrayal. Then came the command, a calm, steady voice from Fluckey. "Fire one!" The torpedo would leave the tube with a deep metallic sigh, followed by a long, agonizing wait. Seconds felt like minutes, until finally a distant explosion rolled through the depths, shaking the submarine like thunder underwater. One of the Barb's most daring missions came in January 1945 in Namquan Harbor off the coast of China. Intelligence had reported a large convoy sheltered within the narrow bay, heavily guarded by mines and patrol boats. No submarine had ever dared to enter such a place. Fluckey studied the charts and made his decision. "We're going in," he said quietly. His crew stared for a moment, then nodded without question. They knew what it meant. That night, Barb surfaced under the cover of darkness and crept into the harbor. The men could see the silhouettes of ships lined up along the shore, the faint glimmer of lights reflecting off the water. It was a sight both beautiful and terrifying. Fluckey maneuvered the submarine carefully between the mine lines, his eyes locked on the periscope, his hands steady on the controls. When the torpedoes were fired, the night erupted in chaos. Explosions ripped through the harbor, flames leaping into the sky as enemy ships burned and capsized. Barb had struck the heart of the enemy's defenses and won. As the submarine raced out of the harbor at full speed, the crew could see the glow of destruction behind them, lighting the horizon like a false sunrise. Depth charges rained into the sea, but none found their mark. "They can't hit what they can't catch," Fluckey murmured with quiet satisfaction. That night, Barb made history destroying an entire convoy and escaping unharmed. It was one of the boldest submarine attacks of the war, a feat that earned Fluckey the Medal of Honor and solidified the Barb's legend. From that moment on, the Barb was no longer just another submarine. It was a symbol of ingenuity, bravery, and defiance. The crew had faced the dragon in its own den and returned to tell the tale. Yet even after such triumph, Fluckey's mind was restless. He was already thinking ahead, planning something even more audacious, something no one in naval history had ever attempted. The ocean had seen many acts of war, but what came next would blur the line between sea and land forever. After the triumph at Namquan Harbor, most commanders would have been satisfied, but not Eugene Fluckey. His mind never rested on past victories. The Barb had become a legend of the sea, yet he wanted to strike a blow that would echo beyond the ocean's edge. One evening, as the submarine drifted quietly in the northern Pacific, he studied a map of Japan's coastline illuminated by a dim red light. He traced the thin line of a railway running close to the shore and paused, a daring thought forming in his mind. What if the Barb could bring the war to Japan itself, not from the sea, but from the land? The idea was unprecedented. Submarines were designed to attack ships, not conduct raids on enemy soil. But Fluckey saw an opportunity where others saw impossibility. Japanese supply trains transported troops and ammunition along the coastal line near Sakhalin Island, and disrupting that line could send shockwaves through their defenses. He knew the risks. The shore was heavily patrolled, and any mistake could mean capture or death for his men. Yet the thought of striking Japan on its own ground filled him with a fierce sense of purpose. Fluckey gathered his officers and outlined the plan in his calm, deliberate tone. They would surface near the island, send a small team ashore under the cover of night, and plant explosives on the railway track. The charge would be connected to a pressure switch that would detonate when a train passed over it. The mission required precision, silence, and absolute courage. Volunteers were called for, and without hesitation, 8 men stepped forward. Some grinned nervously, others simply nodded. Fluckey looked at them and said quietly, "No married men. I couldn't face their widows if anything happened." Operation was named simply but boldly will be the B train raid. It would be the first and only land assault carried out by an American submarine crew during the entire war. For days the Barb stalked the coast waiting for the right night. The sea was calm, the moonlight faint, and the enemy unsuspecting. As the men prepared their small rubber boats and checked the explosives one last time, Fluckey watched them with pride. He knew this mission would test everything they had learned: discipline, courage, and the silent brotherhood that bound them. When the order was finally given, the crew slipped into the darkness, their oars barely rippling the water. Above them, the Barb floated like a guardian, her engines silent, her lights dimmed. On that night, in July 1945, 8 men rowed toward destiny, carrying not just explosives but the weight of history itself. They were about to do what no other American submarine crew had ever done. They were bringing the war to Japan's very shore. The night was still, the air heavy with the scent of salt and pine drifting from the shore. The 8 men from the USS Barb rowed quietly through the darkness, their oars dipping silently into the calm Pacific water. Every stroke brought them closer to enemy soil, to a coastline that few Americans had ever seen, and none had dared to invade. Above them, the stars flickered faintly, their light swallowed by the blackness of war. The men spoke no words. They didn't need to. Each one knew that the success of the mission depended on silence, patience, and trust. When their small rubber boats finally scraped against the sand, they pulled them ashore and crouched low, their boots sinking into the damp earth. Before them stood the dense shadow of trees, and beyond that, the faint outline of the railway that snaked along the coast. The men could hear the distant rumble of waves against rocks, the occasional rustle of wind through tall grass, and somewhere far away the soft, rhythmic clatter of a train. They were deep inside enemy territory, and every breath carried danger. Working by touch and moonlight, they unpacked the explosives and crawled toward the tracks. Their hearts beat slow and steady as they attached the detonator to the steel rails, securing the pressure switch with trembling hands. The charge was small but deadly, designed to destroy an entire train in one sudden burst. When everything was in place, they backed away and waited in silence. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching endlessly as the men crouched in the dark, watching the empty track shimmer faintly under the moon. Then, at last, it came. The low, distant sound of a train approached from the east, a slow rumble growing louder, a vibration felt through the ground. The men could see the faint glow of its headlamp cutting through the night, the screech of metal on metal growing sharper. The moment felt endless, suspended between fear and destiny. As the train thundered over the explosives, there was a flash of light followed by a roar that shattered the stillness. The ground shook beneath them as fire leapt into the air, sparks scattering across the trees, and the sound of twisting steel echoed like thunder rolling through the hills. The explosion was massive. The locomotive lifted off the tracks and crashed in a wave of flame and smoke. Cars tumbled one after another until the wreckage burned in a heap of chaos. The men stared in disbelief for a moment, then broke into quiet, stunned laughter.
They had done it.
They had brought the war to Japan's doorstep. Without wasting a second, they turned back toward the beach, running through the dark forest with the smell of smoke behind them. Their lungs burned, their hearts pounded, but none of them faltered. When they reached the shore, the faint outline of the USS Barb awaited like a silent guardian. They pushed their boats into the surf and paddled furiously, every muscle driven by adrenaline and triumph. As they climbed back aboard, the crew helped pull them in, whispering cheers and clapping shoulders. Commander Fluckey stood at the bridge, a small smile on his face as he watched the glow of the explosion fade behind them. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "that was for every man who dreamed of striking back." Moments later, the Barb slipped beneath the surface, disappearing into the safety of the deep. Behind them, the Japanese coast burned quietly, unaware of who had dared to touch it. The men gathered in silence, still catching their breath, the realization slowly settling in. They had made history, the first and only American submarine crew to set foot on Japan during the war. The train they destroyed would never see another dawn, and the legend of the USS Barb would live forever in the echoes of that single, daring night. As the USS Barb glided back into the depths of the Pacific, the tension that had gripped every man slowly dissolved into relief. The sea around them was calm once more, and for a brief moment it felt as though the ocean itself was proud of what they had done. The crew gathered quietly in the control room, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of instruments. They were exhausted, soaked, and trembling from the adrenaline that still coursed through their veins, but beneath the fatigue was something far greater, an unspoken pride. They had accomplished the impossible and lived to tell about it. Commander Fluckey looked at his men, his expression steady but his eyes full of emotion. "You've done what no one thought could be done," he said in his calm, low voice. "You brought the fight to their doorstep and made history tonight." There were no cheers, no loud celebration, only quiet nods and tired smiles. The Barb had always been a place of discipline and respect, and in that silence, Every man understood the magnitude of what they had achieved. As the submarine slipped farther from the enemy coast, the crew returned to their stations. The engines hummed softly, sonar screens flickered, and the men resumed the rhythm they knew best, working together in perfect harmony. Above them, Japanese patrol boats scoured the coast, searching desperately for the attackers, but the Barb was already gone, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost. When the submarine finally surfaced miles away, the night sky was clear, and the stars shimmered across the ocean like scattered fireflies. The men stood on deck, breathing the cold air, letting it fill their lungs. Some laughed quietly, others stared at the horizon in awe, still processing what they had just done. It was the kind of victory that felt unreal, a story that would sound like legend even as it was happening. When the USS Barb returned to base, word of their mission spread quickly through the fleet. Sailors spoke of it in hushed tones, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Fluckey received the Medal of Honor for his leadership, and the Barb was awarded a Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. Yet, as always, Fluckey deflected the praise. "The real heroes," he said softly, "are the men who made it happen." For the crew of the USS Barb, glory was never the goal. Their reward was survival, their pride was in the bond they shared, and their legacy was in knowing that they had left a mark no one could erase. Beneath the waves, surrounded by silence, they carried the memory of that night with them. The laughter, the fear, the courage, and the quiet understanding that they had done something no one else ever had. They were not just submariners anymore. They were legends of the deep. The story of the USS Barb did not end with the final torpedo or the last explosion. Her legacy lived on long after the war, a tale of ingenuity, defiance, and unshakable courage. During her 7 war patrols in the Pacific, the Barb destroyed 17 enemy ships, including carriers, freighters, and tankers, earning one of the highest victory counts of any submarine in the United States Navy. But what made the Barb's legacy unique was not just her record of destruction, it was the spirit behind those victories, the fearless creativity that defined her crew and her commander. Commander Eugene Fluckey's leadership became a study in brilliance. He taught that courage was not about recklessness, but about believing in possibility, even when the odds seemed impossible. He refused to accept the limitations of conventional warfare. While others saw danger, he saw opportunity, and through that vision, he redefined what submarines could do. His men trusted him with their lives, and he, in turn, trusted them with his vision. Their unity was their greatest weapon. Their calm in the chaos of war, the foundation of every triumph. The most extraordinary symbol of the Barb's legacy remains the small insignia painted proudly on her battle flag. A tiny train representing the night her crew brought the war to Japan's shore. It was a symbol that spoke louder than words, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, innovation and courage could shift the course of history. The image became legendary across the submarine fleet, a badge of honor that marked the Barb as something more than just a vessel of war. She was a vessel of imagination and audacity. When the war finally ended, the men of the Barb returned home quietly. There were no parades for submariners, no roaring crowds to greet them, only the peace of knowing they had done their part. Commander Fluckey continued to serve with the same humility that had guided him in battle, always crediting his crew for every success. In interviews years later, he would still refer to them as the finest men I ever knew. Today, the name USS Barb holds a place of honor in naval history. Her battle flag and records are preserved in the Submarine Force Museum. where visitors pause before the symbol of that tiny train and smile, recognizing the boldness of those who dared to dream beyond the possible. Fluckey himself once said, "War made heroes of ordinary men, but peace made them legends." The Barb story is not only a chronicle of warfare, but a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity, loyalty, and courage. Even decades later, her spirit sails on in every submarine that dives beneath the sea, in every sailor who chooses duty over fear, and in every quiet act of bravery that keeps history alive. The story of the USS Barb is more than a record of battles and victories. It is a meditation on what courage truly means. Beneath the noise of war, beneath the machinery and the orders, there existed a rare kind of bravery that was almost spiritual. It was not born from anger or pride, but from quiet conviction, from the understanding that sometimes the smallest group of determined men can change the course of history. The ocean was both their enemy and their home, an endless expanse that demanded respect, patience, and trust. Every dive into its depths was a conversation with fate, every rise to the surface a whispered promise of survival. Courage, in the world of the USS Barb, was not about charging into danger recklessly. It was about remaining steady when everything else was chaos, about making impossible choices in silence, about staying human when the sea tried to take that humanity away. Commander Fluckey and his crew embodied that kind of courage. They did not seek recognition or glory, they sought purpose. Their victories were not measured only in ships sunk or missions completed, but in the bond they shared, the ingenuity they displayed, and the humanity they preserved even in war's darkest hour. Innovation, too, was their hallmark. The Barb's missions pushed the boundaries of what submarines could achieve, whether slipping through minefields to strike a harbor or daring to launch a land attack on Japan itself. The Barb proved that creativity could be as powerful as weaponry. Fluckey's genius was not just tactical, but human. He understood that belief could turn fear into strength and uncertainty into action. When the guns fell silent and peace returned to the Pacific, the legacy of the USS Barb remained. The sea, in its eternal rhythm, carried the memory of their deeds. Waves still wash over the places they once sailed, and the depths still echo faintly with their courage. The ocean does not remember names, but it remembers spirit. The Barb's story reminds us that even in the vastness of the unknown, human determination can illuminate the dark. It is a story of men who dared to dream, to act, and to endure, and through their courage, they became immortal in the silence of the sea. When the war ended and the world began to heal, the USS Barb was quietly retired, but her story never sank. Her steel may have been laid to rest, yet her spirit continued to move through the generations that followed. Every young submariner who stepped into the dim red glow of a control room, every commander who made a decision under pressure, carried a small part of her legacy within them. The Barb was more than a weapon of war. She was a testament to what humans can achieve when courage meets imagination, when leadership meets faith, and when unity triumphs over fear. For Commander Eugene Fluckey, life after war was marked not by pride but by humility. He never called himself a hero. When asked about the mission that made history, he simply said, "It was the crew who made it possible." To him, the medals and citations were secondary to the memory of the men who followed him without hesitation, who faced the ocean's darkness with quiet strength and laughter in their heart. Today, when people speak of the USS Barb, they speak not only of victories or records, but of the audacity to dream beyond what was thought possible. She remains a symbol of innovation, of bravery that did not roar, but whispered through the depths. The story of her crew is a reminder that greatness often comes from those who work unseen, from those who fight not for fame, but for one another. As the tides continue to roll across the Pacific, the spirit of the Barb still drifts beneath the waves. The sea has long since swallowed the echoes of battle, yet in the hush of the deep, something endures. The pulse of courage, the hum of brotherhood, the quiet defiance of men who refused to be ordinary. The USS Barb may have returned to the stillness of history, but her legacy remains alive in every heart that believes the impossible can be done. Beneath the surface, in the eternal calm of the ocean, the story of the Barb still sails, unseen, undefeated, and forever unforgotten.